Welcome to the Scrutineers series. I'm Emily Levy, founder and director of Scrutineers.org. I'm delighted to be collaborating with whowhatwhy.org to introduce a series of election protection podcasts designed to help you understand the risk to our elections, from voter suppression to lack of security. We'll be talking about what you can do to protect the voters and protect the votes. We're training a fairness force to help make sure no one stops you from voting and all votes are counted accurately. Today, I'm excited to welcome Adrian Fontes, who is the Maricopa County, Arizona recorder. Maricopa is where Phoenix is, and it is not only the most populous county in Arizona, it is actually more than half the state's population, and it's also the second largest voting jurisdiction in the nation, second only to Los Angeles. It's considered to be a swing state in this year's presidential race and also has a tight Senate race. So there are a lot of eyes on Florida right now, and I'm really appreciative that Adrian has taken time today just before the election to be with us. Adrian Fontes has been the county recorder since January of 2017, and prior to joining the recorder's office, he worked as a prosecutor for the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. He worked for the Arizona Attorney General's Office and the Denver District Attorney, though not all at the same time. He also has experience working in private practice, and he's a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. He's a member of the National Association of Counties and their Telecommunications and Technology Policy Steering Committee. And in August of last year, 2019, he received the Certified Elections Registration Designation, which is the election profession's highest accreditation. That was a bit of a tongue twister for some reason. And he also previously owned a mom and pop corner grocery store and community gathering space that was a response to the downtown Phoenix food desert. Welcome, Adrian. Thank you so much for being here.
Emily, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I snuck that last one in from it wasn't in your official bio, but it was in your LinkedIn profile. And I think our listeners would want to know about it.
Some of the best times in my life were spent playing guitar on that porch late in the evening with neighbors. It was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. So will you explain what it means to be the county recorder as opposed to the elections director? Because I think Maricopa also has an elections director. Is that right?
Sure. The Maricopa County Recorder is one of about a half a dozen independent constitutional officers. We are sort of the silos of the executive branch of county government. We've got a county attorney, a sheriff, an assessor, a treasurer, a recorder, and there's one or two other ones. So we're constitutional officers, so we're independent of the Board of Supervisors, which is more of like the legislative branch of our county government, if you will. The county recorder is responsible for keeping the permanent record. So when you buy or sell a house, the deeds and titles and all that fancy stuff gets filed in my office. We keep those records in perpetuity. Also, a lot of other government stuff gets filed in that side of the office. And then I'm the registrar of voters and in charge of all early voting, which is a big chunk of our elections here in Maricopa County in Arizona, a growing portion, actually, pretty significantly. And then there's an election department, which in 1955 was chartered to the recorder. That, by statute, was supposed to be part of the Board of Supervisors' responsibility, but the recorder has been running all of the elections responsibilities, including hiring and firing the election director over that department for decades. We adjusted that model to get back closer to the statutory model recently. So now we have co-directors, the director of early voting and services, which I appoint. And then there's a director of election day and emergency voting. They sort of co-run all of elections. That other director is appointed by the Board of Supervisors. So we have a much better model now than we did in the past here in Maricopa County, thanks to some negotiations myself and one of the prior chairs did. So it's a little complicated, but I am still generally considered and still generally I'm the chief election officer for this jurisdiction. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And what motivated you to seek this position?
Well, so I got angry and I wasn't going to take it anymore. Like that old movie, I think it was Network, wasn't it?
I think it was Network. Yeah.
I mean, it was just like that, right? In 2016, in our presidential primary, which in Arizona we call the presidential preference election, many folks remember March 22nd, the day that lives in infamy, where we had 4 and 5 hour long lines here in Arizona And in the Metro Phoenix area, Maricopa County, we're not used to waiting for stuff. And folks were really, really upset. And I was very upset. You know, there were some estimates that said close to 130,000 people couldn't vote because they had to wait so long in lines. And it was a real problem. And I felt like we had to have a conversation about it. I ran against a 28-year incumbent. She was in her 7th term, had never been opposed by a Democrat. And I am a registered Democrat. And so, you know, I ran so that we could have the conversation because we really needed some reform in the administration of our elections here. I ended up winning, which nobody expected, least of all me. And now I get to run this. I feel like Robert Redford at the end of that one movie where he became a U.S. Senator and was sitting behind the desk at the end, looking around saying, now what? But we got some stuff done.
So what were the biggest challenges you faced when you took office, and how did you address them?
Well, there were 3 major challenges that we had showing up. First and foremost, the prior administration had really operated under a culture of heroes, if you will. That's where, for example, you've got 5 people in a section or a division of the office. One person retires or leaves for whatever reason. They never replaced that person. So 4 people would take on the job and split it up. Then if somebody else left, they still wouldn't replace that person. And so now you've got 3 people doing the work of 5. And it was inefficient. So we didn't have enough people. That was the first big challenge. The second big challenge was funding, right? They had been operating under the idea that all government has to be underfunded forever. And you can't do that with elections, right? You have to have the resources necessary to serve the public. And the third was we had this lingering burden of technology that was really, really old and really inefficient and designed for a much smaller jurisdiction. When I took over, we were over 2.1 million registered voters, and we were operating on 8-bit technology. Now, when I say 8 bits, I'm not talking about 8 bytes. I'm talking about bits, ones and zeros, only 8 of them in a row. And we had to program sometimes 12,000 different ballot styles with just 8 bits. So our programmers were geniuses, but we were barely squeezing by. So it was people, it was funding, and it was technology, all of which needed.
And what was the election system that you were using then?
So we had our big scanners were the 400Cs that were the old Sequoia system. Dominion Election Services had been servicing us for many years before I showed up. In fact, Dominion's got a couple of people who are permanently employed and stationed here in our warehouse. That's their place of business because we're such a large jurisdiction that they support. Wow. So we basically give them office space as part of an agreement with them because they're always here and we need them. And we're probably one of their biggest clients, if not their biggest client. And so we work hand in glove with them. And that system also used the old, they were like the Eagle 1000 polling place scanners, I think, circa 19.
I vaguely remember those. Yeah.
86, I think. So they were optical scanners with those big cartridges.
Eagle Optech, is that?
Yeah, the Optech. Yeah. And so, yeah, we had a couple thousand of those things that we would mess around with. I think there's only 1 or 2 jurisdictions in the country that are left that still use those. We just got rid of them, last year.
And what did you get instead?
Well, we have that we went through our regular RFP process, and so we have these new fancy dancy. We still use Dominion. They won the contract. We have some high speed. I can't remember what they're called, but they're the big German-made high speed scanners that took us from 3,000 ballots an hour to anywhere between 6,000 and 8,000 ballots an hour. So we've got 9 of those. And we've got the, I'm going to mess it up. We've got their new ballot marking devices and the scanners that come with it.
It looks like the Democracy Suite is what you have from what I looked up. That's a combination of the image cast precinct. Does that sound
right? Is that it? ICPs and ICXs and EIEIOs. And I don't remember all the letters and names and stuff. I'm not a technician. But I can tell you that the system is working like a dream. And I'm really glad that we can do the things that we can do now because we're a lot more efficient and a lot more transparent.
So I want to really talk about transparency because from my perspective as an election security advocate for the last 16 years, I know that these electronic systems are not transparent. That the way the systems are designed, there's input and there's output, and you can't see what's going on inside because it happens inside the software and can be manipulated by malware. There can be software errors because there's so many lines of code that involved in the software. And so I'm wondering, I know transparency is important to you, and it's a part of why I wanted you on the show, is that I know you've worked really hard on transparency. So let's talk about what ways you've found to make the system as transparent as possible.
Well, first and foremost, we insist on having paper ballots across the board. And Arizona has mandatory hand count audits at the end of every election. We're very pleased, actually, at the results during the primary in 2020 that we just had this August. Our hand count audit came out exact the first time, 100%. We have never seen that before. We've always had to go back and try to figure out, what the deal was, why these numbers are 1 or 2 votes off here or there. This time it was perfect the first time out, and we were very excited about that. So insofar as paper ballots, the actual physical manifestation of the voter's intent, we have that. So that's a huge.
So that's a paper ballot that's hand marked by the voter, except for voters that need a ballot marking device for accessibility reasons?
That's correct. And even the ballot marking devices will list the voter's choice, not just the barcode or QR code. Right, so they will be able to verify that those are the selections that they've made before we put those into the tabulating devices at the vote centers or at the precincts.
Well, theoretically, that's true. I've got a little bit of a bone to pick with that, because it's the barcode that's actually read when you put that. And so, if by any chance there was malware that caused the list of votes that the voter had marked to be different from what's encoded in the barcode, there would be no way for the voter to verify that.
That's true. And we also use those ballots in the hand count audit. And so we don't exclude any votes from the hand count audit, whether they are UOCAVA votes that were reproduced for some reason, that may have been submitted electronically by military and overseas voters, whether they were made by these ballot marking devices, which illustrate because human beings can't read the QR code, but it's human beings that do the hand count audit. So those are part of that. So I get your concern. I feel you, but I think we do have a stopgap for that as well. Then on the physical side of things, we've taken great pains to really make our system look and feel about as good as it can, right? Every single one of our scanners has 2 cords coming off of it. One is a power cord that goes into, whatever the extension cord is on the ground. And the other is the digital cable that goes up into a rack that is suspended lower than the ceiling. All of the racks lead those cables directly into a server that is in a glass room. We built a sealed room. All the cables go in, and you can actually see the connections of the cables into the back of the server through the glass room. The public can see this. They just walk into the front door. They look through the ballot tabulation center into it. So
why is that important, to be able to see the cables?
Yeah, every single cable is visible, and we did this on purpose. And we really recreated that room and put the cabling in the way that we did on purpose so that you could see it. It didn't used to be that way. They used to be behind a closed door in an office, and you couldn't really see in, and you couldn't really see what the connectivity was of those cables. So, and that room is also equipped. The larger room, or the kind of the glass room is inside of, the larger room is equipped with 24/7 cameras that you can log onto via the internet. That's where the electronic adjudication happens. The ballots come in one door from the vault. They go out the other door into a separate section of the vault, which has a dry suppression system in it. That's brand new. We literally just finished building it about 2 weeks ago.
That's to keep moisture control? Is that what that's for?
Well, the ballots in there because the rest of the warehouse, the rest of the warehouse is equipped with a wet suppression system. And
I'm not sure what that is, a dry suppression or wet suppression system. I haven't heard those expressions
suppression
before.
System is basically sprinklers. So if you've got a ballot tabulation room with a lot of electronic equipment, scanners, and paper ballots, and you have a fire, guess what? You're going to lose a lot if there is a fire. versus bringing a batch of ballots in, running them through the scanners, and taking them back out. And the in and out where they're coming from and going back to is one vault, right, with two divisions in it. And it's all dry suppression. So if for whatever reason there's a fire in the vault, which doesn't have any electronic equipment in it, except for the cameras in the ceiling, the ballots are safe and secure in a place where they won't get wet. Right? So
it's sucking the oxygen out rather than putting water in. Is that how?
Yeah, it's not a wet suppression. It's a dry suppression. I think they use, I want to say halon. Is it?
Okay. I have no idea. This is all news to me.
No,
so let's go back to the cords. What is it that you want people to understand from the fact that they can see the cords? There's no
connectivity except back to the server. It is a closed system. So when the ballot gets put into one of the scanners, it gets scanned. The data goes directly from the scanner itself in the batch to the server. And we do have the electronic adjudication system. So if there is a selection on one of the ballots that needs to be adjudicated, that pops out. It's audited by a bipartisan electronic adjudication team. That then gets added to the tabulation. But not only is there an electronic log attached to the image of the ballot, we do a separate paper log as well. So we can cross-reference by hand what those two electronic adjudication board folks are doing. We can cross-check that against the electronic record if we ever need to go back and do an audit.
So let's make sure everyone knows what adjudication means.
So adjudication effectively means this. If a voter, for example, in a contest, pick one, you got candidate A, candidate B. Let's say somebody fills in the little bubble for candidate A and then is like, oops, I should have voted for candidate B. Then they fill in the bubble for candidate B, and they draw a line through candidate A, or they make a little notation that says, not this one, right? Or yes here, no there. Whatever the voter's intent is, if the electronic adjudication board can determine that intent based on an image capture of that contest on the ballot, and that's all they see. They don't see the rest of the ballot. They can't see what the voter's looking at in other races. So there's a lot of integrity that one selection, that one contest. If those two board workers can determine the voter's intent, then they will go ahead and determine the voter voted for candidate B, not candidate A, because we could determine intent. They go ahead and make that log into the electronic record of that ballot. It gets added to the ballot. It is on the same document, the same electronic document that the image is on. So you can see the original image, you can see what the determination is, and you can see who the adjudicators were. That's all in the electronic record. Then they keep, right, the auditor or the electronic adjudicators keep a separate paper record of that action that they just did. So that if anybody wants to go back and say, oh, they were changing votes, you can go back and say, well, here's the image, here's what they determined, here's what they logged in electronically, here's the paper log of that as well. So we have a redundancy that's not even required by law, and it goes above and beyond what Dominion's system even calls for. So they don't call for the paper log on their system. And that's what's certified by EAC. We've gone above and beyond that.
Fantastic.
We want to make sure to have.
And this isn't for every vote, but for the votes that the scanners are not able to count.
Yes, correct. For overvotes or where there's a pen drop, a bleed through, something like that. Yes.
Great. And so one thing I've been wondering, because I know that there are election protection advocates, election security advocates in Arizona who've been working for a long time on improving the election systems. And we have a lot of folks doing that kind of work who listen to our show. So is there anything you could say about what's been the role of those folks in improving the systems in Maricopa County or in Arizona in general?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, when I got elected in 2017, they asked to meet with me and I said, sure. Let's meet. And one of the great things about that first meeting was, they came in with fresh eyes and they said, listen, we have had concerns in the past and we want to work with you to alleviate these concerns. Here's our attitude. Here's our overall goal. Here's what we'd like to accomplish, right? And that first meeting, I think, was one of the most fruitful meetings and really opened the door, because they came in with a tone of, look, we want to help you do the things that you said you wanted to do. You said you wanted to be more transparent. You said you wanted to improve the voter's experience. and you said you wanted to really kind of open the doors and let in the sunshine and have more accountability in the office and more security. And I said, yes, yes, yes to all of that. So they said, let us be that other perspective. Let us be that other set of eyes and ears. And if you just listen to what we have to say, we don't always have to agree, but at least we've got a seat at the table. And I thought that was a really great approach. From that moment forward, I've had conversations with, the folks that sit in that seat, and there's a whole bunch of them. One specifically, John Robert Brakey down in Tucson. Your listeners have probably heard of him or talked to him.
Yeah, I've worked with him actually.
I'll tell you what, that guy. An interesting personal story. He knows one of my dad's cousins who worked concrete down in Tucson back in an old former career of John's. Anyway, fun kind of a deal. But he's a neat guy, and we get to talk a bit, and I listen to what he has to say. And again, here's the important thing. He and I don't always agree on everything. And he pushes the envelope with me, but he does it in a respectful way, and I appreciate it. And he listens to me also, because he understands that I have budgetary restrictions, I have people restrictions, I have technology restrictions, and more than any of that, I have legal restrictions. There are things that the law allows, and there are things that the law doesn't allow. And regardless of what everybody thinks or wants, I got to follow the law.
Absolutely. And so if folks who are listening are doing advocacy work in places where the chief election officer in their jurisdiction is not as transparency minded as you are, what do you think are the most important things for them to be doing as a way of providing public oversight for elections?
Well, I mean, there's no substitute for conversation. Never. Personal relationships are really the way that things get done. That's how the world turns. And I've always thought that was the best way to get anything done. Sometimes those things need to be fostered over a very long period of time when values are not specifically aligned. But, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing. And it can be hard work sometimes. Other times it's just a question of building those relationships through listening carefully to what folks have to say. You can be really, really defensive as an administrator in any area, but particularly elections administration. And I'm sure, some of your listeners have run up against this when the tone is almost always accusatory, right? You're doing this wrong. You're doing that wrong. You're not doing enough of this. You're not doing enough of that. And you've got people who are either elected or appointed who, A, don't have the resources, B, don't have the resources, and C, don't have the
resources.
Yeah, so it's really, really hard from the perspective of an election administrator. Now, my perspective is quite different because we managed to get the resources, right? So we did some fun stuff and some fun negotiations to make this happen, brought some more stakeholders into the game, and they're the ones with the pockets. So we could do a lot. But again, that's critically important. So I guess the best advice I could give is listen carefully and be considerate of the position that the other person is in. It's not always nefarious, and it's not always malintended if you don't get what you're asking for. Sometimes it's just a question of, I've got priorities, and you might not be the top priority. And that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
One of the questions I have about Maricopa County in terms of the practices that I understand are being used there, and I'm in San Francisco, California, I'm not in Arizona, is that you use vote centers. In other words, not precincts, but people can vote at any of the locations that are available in the county, regardless of where in the county they live and they're registered.
Right.
And I know that those can really increase convenience, and they also provide some security challenges, including, as far as I know, to have vote centers, you really have to use electronic poll books, which are another software-based system that has significant vulnerabilities. And I'm wondering how you've dealt with those additional security challenges of using vote centers.
Well, insofar as our voter check-in system and our ballot creation system, so that it's all integrated, we made it ourselves. I'm a lucky guy in that I have an IT department of about a dozen folks, maybe a little more, that worked hand in glove with the election department to give those folks what they needed. We have a one-off system. It is unique to Maricopa County. We wrote the code here, and effectively what it does is it integrates the voter registration system, the ballot creation / voter check-in system, and the sort of not the tabulation system, because that's separate, but the sort of the ballot processing system, so for signature verification. So each voter has its own record, right, or has their own record. They have their own voter ID number in our system and so forth. When they get registered, right, and then if they either check in or get mailed a ballot, that ballot goes out under that particular voter's number. When we get it back, either because they voted in person or we received the ballot back, it flags the system, and then we do the signature verification on the other side. So insofar as
the ballot, when it comes back, the ballot itself does not have their identifying number on it, I assume.
No, that's correct. It is
okay.
The
Important thing.
Yes. Thank you for making that clarification. Yes, it's the affidavit envelope that has the signature and the voter's ID number on it. At the point of processing, where the citizen boards separate the envelope and the ballot, then you have anonymity. And in that 11-step process, we kind of balance out the envelopes that have been signature verified with the ballots. We know how many come in, we know how many come out, and then the ballots end up going to tabulation. So, but insofar as data security is concerned, from the voter registration record, right, we have sort of the mother server where that data kind of lives. And then we have, and I won't get too much into describing the details because obviously we don't want to have like what our infrastructure looks like out there. We've got what we use day in and day out to feed the mother record, okay? And that system that we use is attached live to our signature verification system and to the vote centers. So we know.
So if a voter comes in, if a voter has received a ballot in the mail and they decide that they want to come vote at a vote center, can they, when they arrive, can they cancel that mail ballot and vote in person?
Well, they can't. We can.
Okay. So but they can ask to have that happen.
Right. If you have a ballot in the mail coming to you and you're like, forget about it, I just want to vote in person, which is what a lot of people are doing today, they'll just come in and check in. And the minute they check in, then that other affidavit envelope is effectively canceled.
So if they never received their mail ballot, they still have a way to vote.
Absolutely. And that's without voting. That's why vote centers are important. And one of the other reasons vote centers are important is because of the access that voters have, right? So not only do we have security concerns that I think we've dealt with really well, but the access issue is an important one. So, one of the things that people say is, well, Adrian, before you got elected, there were like 700 precincts with polling places, 748 of them for voters to vote at on election day. And now you're down to less than 200. You're crushing access out there. And I'm like, okay, if you're only using that one metric, which is a false leader, then that's fine. But what you're ignoring is the fact that 27 days before election day, I've opened 7 vote centers and anyone can vote at any of them. 2 weeks before election day, I'm opening 4 dozen more, including on nights and weekends, and any voter can vote at any of them. And then a week later, which is a week before election day, we're going to take that number up to about 100 across Maricopa County so anybody can vote anywhere. So we don't have an election day where one voter goes to one place, right? So when you say 748 for the voter, you're really only saying 1 per voter. But now you've got 7 for 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks. Then you go take that up to 50 for the next week, and then you take that up to 100 for the following week, up to 200 on election day. How many more opportunities, how much more access do voters have? It's exponential, right? And in the old model where you had 748 precincts, you had 748 opportunities for thousands, tens of thousands of pre-printed ballots to get misused, miscategorized, misaligned, and so forth. It was a significant logistical nightmare. And here's something that I think your folks ought to pay close attention to. So listen carefully, Emily, because I'm
listening.
Hair on fire with this one.
He's shaking his finger at me actually right now.
Shaking my finger at you because
election security people never consider this. What happens to the ballot audit from election day at pre-printed polling places? Where's the ballot audit? How many ballots showed up versus how many voters checked in versus how many voters or how many ballots were counted at that polling place? That audit, how many folks are actually looking at those numbers?
Folks are photographing poll tapes, which have some of those numbers on them. And then...
But are they comparing them to the number of pre-printed ballots which were issued to that polling place? That ballot audit, I would challenge that ballot audit from the number of pre-printed ballots in the polling place through to the number of voters that checked in and then the number of ballots actually
that are left over. That's a really good point.
It's rarely, and I mean rarely looked at. And you know why I know it's rarely looked at? Because in Maricopa County, that ballot audit was suspended after the November election in 2016. My predecessor stopped that audit dead in its tracks. I don't know why, and I don't care. But when I got in that January 2017 and then February, and I started realizing how things worked, I ordered that audit to be restarted, and it could never be finished. It could not be completed because of the nature of the records. Certain records were under seal. Everything was over in the custody of the treasurer. And the only way to get it out of that custody of the county treasurer, because that's what the law says, the only way to get all of that stuff back would have been to go through a court order and to sue. And I didn't have any reason to sue. Not having that audit, you don't have a reason to sue on that. So the question then becomes, when you don't have a vote center, where you're printing an individual ballot for every single voter that walks in, no more, no less, where you're putting those ballots into an envelope that's going to be signature verified, which is essentially the ballot by mail system. You're just giving it to them in person instead of sending it in the mail. When you can have that kind of accountability, one signature inside of an envelope, you've got that ballot per voter, it's a world of difference.
So at the voting center, when people vote in person, their ballot still goes into an envelope that they sign?
Not on election day proper, no.
Okay.
Okay, but we still are just issuing one ballot per voter that checks in, and we're only printing one ballot per voter that checks in with the control sheet. So we have a lot more checks and balances in that system, and our ballot audit is naturally, way more accurate than it would have been under the old system.
That's fascinating, and it gives me about 15 more questions I want to ask you that we don't have time to ask. I've got a couple more questions I want to squeeze in. Do you have a few more minutes?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much. So you mentioned when you were running for election, and I discovered in the process of setting up this call that you're actually in a race now, which I hadn't realized, that you're running for re-election. And I know that that can really raise questions for people when someone is both running an election and running for election in that same place. And I wonder how you handle that in a way that allows voters to have confidence that things are on the up and up.
We handle it very carefully, and I stay the hell away from the operation during the time when live ballots are anywhere near the ballot tabulation system. I haven't been in the side of the warehouse where the ballots are handled at all since there've been printed live ballots in there, and I won't go into that side of the building, although I have an office on the other side of the building with a separate entrance that I pop in and out of once in a while to do like a Facebook Live video or something like that, but then I get out of there. COVID helps me be away from there because I do most of my work right here in my home office. But here's the other most important thing about this. We've got a big enough office and a big enough operation that the career professionals who've been there before me, and some of them may very well be there after me, depending on what happens this November, they're the ones running this thing. And I think people forget that folks in positions like mine don't do the day-to-day handling of ballots. We don't do the day-to-day handling of the tabulation systems. Those are done by folks who are on regular county payroll. They're not beholden to me and in any way during this sort of process. And they believe in the integrity of the system as well, right? So does this thing operate to a degree on faith? Yeah, it does. But the reality is we've got folks who don't care who the elected is, and they don't care what the results are, right? These folks see elections at least 4 times a year, every year, in multiple jurisdictions out of particularly Maricopa County. We've got 24 cities. We've got a couple dozen school districts. Actually, more than a couple dozen. I think we have 3 or 4 dozen school districts. We've got fire districts, waste management districts. We've got congressional districts that have special elections. We've got elections all the time. So we're busy all the time with this stuff. And frankly, it's enough to keep the lights on and to have to deal with all the rest of this stuff where people say, oh, well, there's this fiddling here and that fiddling over there. These are folks just like you and me. And let me just add this. Every step of the way has partisan observers deeply involved in the system. In the tabulation room, we cannot and will not scan a ballot unless there are observers from the political parties in the room with us. Just won't do it. We won't be processing ballots unless there are political observers in the rooms with us. And all of our boards are managed. When I say board, this is 2 folks that actually handle the ballots. They have to be of opposing political parties. Even the electronic adjudication that I talked about earlier, these are opposing political parties. And so all the way through the entire system, there's checks and balances across the board. And I know very well that there are people in the very warehouse that I run who will not vote for me. They just won't. And I'm okay with that, right? Because I'm an American first and I'm a partisan like 3rd or 4th. Like singer-songwriter comes before that at some stage of the game.
Father, I bet, comes before that.
Oh, yeah, Dad comes way before even the rest of it. So yeah, we're I understand the concerns. I don't think that they're illegitimate concerns, but I think folks forget about all of the rest of the people involved, all of the other checks and balances that are engaged throughout these systems to keep the integrity up. I can't speak for other jurisdictions around the country, but in Arizona, we've got a really, really great crew of professional election administrators who are not political. Even the County Recorders Association, there's 15 counties, there's 15 of us electeds. Like, you'll see disagreements on policy, and it'll be like 2 Republicans and a Democrat against 2 Democrats and a Republican over here, depending on the issue, right? So that's just kind of the way it is in this really weird little corner of government.
Thank you. And my final question is, what's still on your wish list to do to make the system even better than it is now?
Well, we have a software architecture on the inside of our system that has been Frankensteined together over the last several decades. And because of sort of the nature of the changes that we've made, that was one of the things that we decided was going to be sort of a second-term tackle. The entire website needs to be updated. The architecture behind the website, which is utilized by literally millions of people, because it's the recorder website, right? People look stuff up, all the records that we have. We've got a whole bunch of the internal infrastructure from a technology perspective that needs upgrading. We've got a lot more work to do on the security side, but a lot of that has to do with sort of personnel security and infrastructure security that I think needs improving. We're in really good shape right now. We're working very closely with law enforcement and federal intelligence agencies and other folks to make sure it's sort of to watch the perimeter for us. But internally, I think we can do more there. And then most critically, I think, is sort of the outreach and education, right? I think one of the most important things we can do is tell the public the story of what it means to run an election. This is not easy work, right?
Absolutely.
And the folks listening here understand that just better than anybody else. We need to get better at storytelling. We need to get better at sharing with folks how it is that their elections run so that we can break down the barriers of misunderstanding, of suspicion, sort of the conspiracy theories and all that kind of fun stuff, which can be engaging, but it can be destructive too. And we don't want that. We want things to go well. We want folks to trust the career professionals that do this thing because they're just you and me, right? They're regular citizens, retired teachers, those sorts of folks who are actually running the show.
Well, and I think that election protection advocates and election officials share the desire for there to be voter confidence, for there to be public confidence in the elections. And I appreciate that you have approached trying to increase public confidence by increasing the reasons for confidence, rather than, some things I see in other places where they're placating the public and giving false reassurances. And I don't believe that you're doing that.
Yeah, no, voters aren't dumb, and I think that there's a lot of folks in this line of work who come to interactions with the public with a little bit of an attitude of condescension.
Absolutely.
Our systems are complicated, but look, people out there work with complicated systems every single day. I mean, have you tried to manage a mass transit system in a major metropolitan area if you're not from that town? It can be nerve-wracking, right? Just that. How do I catch a bus from here to there, or a train, or whatever combination of that? Until you've been there and you've seen it and you're in it, you can tell someone, oh, get on the, I don't know, what do you guys have out there in San Francisco? Get on the orange line from here to there and then jump on the tube or whatever you have. I don't know. I don't even know, see? But it's something simple to someone who has seen it and has used it. Election administration is not dissimilar. We've got a lot of complicated moving parts in these systems. We want to teach folks about them, or we ought to want to teach folks about them, so that it is more familiar, so that we can rebuild a lot of the trust that's been lost over the years because of the lack of communication. Because of the way that we've sort of closed the door to these things across the country, we need to blow the doors open and let the sun shine in, like I said earlier. That's the way we're going to rebuild confidence in these incredibly important systems.
Thank you so very much. And I want to give a special thanks to you for taking time out right before the election to be with us today, explain all this. You've been listening to Adrian Fontes, who is the county recorder from Maricopa County, Arizona, where Phoenix is. This is Emily Levy from Scrutineers.org and the Scrutineers series. Thanks so much, Adrian, for being with us, and thanks to the audience for listening.
Super happy. Thank you so much, Emily.
You can find rough transcripts of each episode at whowhatwhy.org/podcast. You're invited to get involved in the election protection movement by joining Scrutineers at Scrutineers.org. That's SCRUTINEERS.org. Whether you're a seasoned activist or advocate or have never before worked for social justice, you're welcome. Both Who, What, Why and Scrutineers depend on your support to keep our work going. If you appreciate what we do, please donate through our websites. You'll find Who, What, Why at whowhatwhy.org/donate. Remember to check your voter registration and help others do the same. And vote in every election. Thanks for listening.